Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Government Operations Committee meeting for November 18th. Thank you for sending out the meeting minutes over the weekend. I didn't see any corrections. So I get approval of October 21st meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, ayes have it. Moving on, today we just have one long topic. And it's the continuation of BACs, not BACs, excuse me, land bank. Kicking off.
Well, so HCD has been kind enough to set up a guest speaker for us today who's active with the Land Bank Authority. So Melinda, I'm going to pass it to you to do the introduction, and then we'll be able to bring the gentleman in.
Okay, so we have the Executive Director, Mr. Sean Edwards from the Augusta Land Bank, is going to do a quick presentation, discuss what the Augusta Land Bank Authority does, and then answer some of your questions. Welcome, Mr. Edwards. We appreciate you taking the time out to spend with us and to discuss land banks. I'm going to pass it over to you now.
Good morning.
Morning.
Is my audio coming through okay? I didn't get an opportunity to test it prior to joining.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. And forgive me for occasionally looking sideways. I'm learning how to use two monitors, so your faces are on one screen and my notes are on another. So I think I'm making eye contact when I'm actually turning away from you. Firstly, thank you for the invitation. As a member of the state organization, the Georgia Association of Land Bank Authorities, we work diligently to try to partner with communities to ensure that the resources that each potential municipality needs are made available. We want to undergird what is the mission of land banks, and as noted, I'll walk through that briefly with you in presentation, but more importantly, answer any pertinent questions that you have as y'all begin to or continue down the road of consideration of whether or not a land bank is right for your community. So if the presentation has been either pulled up or distributed, I will begin if we're okay. All right, fantastic. Oh, I see it coming up on screen. And am I going to have share control here, or will I just be asking for the next slide?
Just ask for next slide.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So again, land banks, as you probably are aware, beginning this research now, are particular entities set up as agreements to be tools for your community to better utilize the power of the state to make local decisions. And I think that's something that will be pressed throughout this presentation, discussion, and your consideration, is that the land bank operates the way in which your community needs it to. And so I'll go through what some of those authorities and powers are, how we have utilized some of that here in Augusta, and then answer any questions that you have. So we can go next slide. Just who I am and what I've done. So we've already done introductions. Thank you for moving past that. So again, we're just simply discussing today, what is a land bank authority? How do those work? And then how can it be of benefit to Athens? Next slide, please. So land banks operate a little bit differently now since the 2012 Land Bank Act came out. We have the benefit here in Augusta of my predecessor, Mr. Norman Michael, being one of the three authors of that policy and law that was voted on back then in 2012 to give land banks additional authority in order to deal with the issues of blight. But they are essentially an agreement between cities, city and county, city and province, depending on the area of the country that you're in, to establish a set of rules that allow a government entity to be able to operate within the private market of real estate in order to meet goals of the citizens. We'll talk a little bit in more detail about what blight is and how we describe that here based on a definition given by the Center for Community Progress. But as you can note in the slide, land banks have become a tool that's very much so sought after as a quasi arm of government, now being over 300 of them in the country. Next slide, please. So as of February of this year, there are now 19 states that have land bank policies in place, and there are established over 31 land banks in the state of Georgia under the GALBA Association. We have the honor here in our state to have the longest serving executive director of a land bank, Ms. Allison Goldie, who at one point in time was in Macon Bibb, is now down in Savannah, Chatham. And we have the longest established land bank in the state of Georgia as well, in the Metro Atlanta Land Bank, headed by Mr. Chris Norman, formerly being the Atlanta Fulton Land Bank. So there's a wealth of experience in the potential partners that you will have if you elect to move down this path. There are folks that have seen every single change. Our land bank has been in place since 1996, ratified in 1997. As I noted, my predecessor was here from the very beginning with this organization coming from the city's economic development department. I came over in 2019 in January, taking over this seat from housing and community development, and have been able to move the organization down what it desired as its new path, being more so of a redevelopment authority than a traditional land bank. Next slide, please. So I noted that word blight, but we don't use that terminology anymore because it is a little subjective. Really what we're talking about when we talk about blighted property is vacancy, abandonment, and deterioration. It is the combination of overgrown lots, be them privately owned, nonprofit owned, faith-based organization owned, or city owned. They are the houses that are partially burned where there's not funding to be able to get them demolished. They are properties that have been left abandoned and are boarded up but are not mothballed properly or outside of compliance when it comes to code enforcement. And it's every single issue that goes along with those properties being in that current state, not just a loss of interest from investors putting money into those communities. It's a loss of value for the residents that still remain there. It is opportunities for increased crime, having the available spaces for things to take place. But it's also just the feeling that goes into those neighborhoods as you drive block by block and see properties that are underutilized that could bring value and revenue to the municipality, but there's not an actual plan in place in order to be able to deal with those issues. Next slide, please. So what do land banks help you do? First and foremost, it allows you to be very specific in where you go. Problem properties are often within our urban cores. They're in the older parts of our city where infrastructure might need to still be improved, streets need to still be cleaned up, lighting still needs to be improved, but also it's often where you have senior level homeowners that potentially can become victims of all of the crime that vacant properties, abandoned properties allow for. In order to be able to tackle that problem best, you have to have a two-pronged approach in order to break the cycle of further deterioration. One, you've got to have the ability in order to draw investment from the private market to go with available resources at the municipality level. That could be infusion of capital directly, that could be tax abatements, that could be tax exemptions, that could be refunds of fees, but you also have to have a desired population wanting to go into those communities. That could be home buyers or renters, but you've got to start to change the brand and the belief of what those neighborhoods that have the majority of this is. Land banks let you do both of those by exercising its capacity to be able to work with the private market to bring investment, but also being community minded through homeowners association meetings, neighborhood association meetings, community meetings to start to build that pipeline so that private investors can realize a return. Next slide, please. Land banks also give you the option or the opportunity rather to be an equitable change agent. Because you're working from the community level up, which is one of the responsibilities of government is those services supplied to citizens, you get opportunities to do unique projects. Outlined here is a community garden project that is shown in the city of St. Louis. We actually had the chance to see this garden in person at the Reclaiming Vacant Properties Conference that just took place, which is a national level event for land banks, land trusts, and those working within the Blighted, Vacant, Abandoned, and Deteriorated Spaces Conference. But we also had an opportunity to visit this site during the National Land Bank Network Conference. You make some land available for green spaces now, typically headed through Parks and Recreation departments, and they become an asset to a neighborhood when well maintained, but simultaneously they become a draw on the budget. And if there's not a community center located at that site to generate some kind of fees or some type of program normally sponsored through a nonprofit to offset fees, sometimes green spaces, even if they're as small as pocket parks, can become a burden on taxpayers when you need to do a balancing of the budget. Spaces that can take care of themselves, that do not require further investment after being made available, not only can change a community, but it also can be good for the bottom line. Because those spaces then, one, are no longer abandoned and they're in good condition. Two, you don't have to spend money out of the budget to keep them up. And three, they can become placemaking opportunities for individuals that want to buy homes in that area or build homes in that area. Next slide, please. Lastly, is that ability in order to be able to work also with the neighborhood in order to create a vibrancy, energy, movement. You do this often with placemaking activities that could be murals or art spaces or statue gardens or pocket parks. Land banks have the ability to hold those properties tax exempt for any organization in order to then be able to create some aspects of the neighborhood coming back. You do this early in pre-planning processes, in pre-development activities when you're talking about construction, because you want to create a pipeline of buyers. You want to create a pipeline of renters. Well, folks want to go into neighborhoods that have a future, not just a past. Land banks can help you to define that and to honor that for local residents, and it can be done at every single neighborhood so it's unique to their historical culture and their significance. In this picture, of course, you're seeing a community garden being maintained by local residents. We've seen statues of historic figures from neighborhoods that are on parcels within our Laney Walker neighborhood. We have an actual community garden project that is being maintained by seniors in our Bethlehem neighborhood here. We've worked with our Arts Council and Downtown Development Authority on parcels of land bank land to put new statues in, and are now working with them, since there's a new wave of statues being purchased by the city, to relocate those properties out of the boundaries of the DDA to a statue garden that is just across the street from our judicial center. Land banks let you create real community at the neighborhood level. Next slide, please. So returning back to that blight definition, because I think it's important to drive that home. That's what you're dealing with if you're thinking about a land bank. Land trusts for our political leaders typically are considered for the maintenance of affordable housing. Community investments trusts, real estate trusts, typically when we want to start to look at mixed use development or bringing in more retail. But when you're talking about a land bank, it's because you've got housing in a community or vacant land that could be generating taxes for you that you don't have a strategy to move forward, either because of procurement processes, the legality and transparency of disposing of property, or because you haven't put yourself in a position to be able to get those properties in a condition where folks will come and buy them off of the tax roll from tax sale, be that non-judicial or judicial in realm. Land banks let you do everything in one swoop. And we are typically very small staffs. I am just now getting to a second staff person after being here for 5.5 years. Started with just an office manager and myself. We are only a budget of $141,000 on our general fund, and we take care of all of our other expenses. They front load administrative costs for salaries only, and we generate the revenue to do every single other thing in our operations budget, from benefits to our rent, phone bills, cable, internet, travel, mileage reimbursements, training. We take care of all of our expenses through the sale of property. So I am, on behalf of the city of Augusta, essentially running my own small business to put properties back into the tax roll system so that they can have additional revenue. But we haven't seen a budget change since the establishment of this organization. So you're not creating a land bank to be a draw on the general fund. It's not going to be a drain. You create a land bank because you need an avenue in order to be able to get the general fund up. And then you're also dealing with these heavy conditions in your community. Next slide, please. So everybody likes data, and I'm a big fan of data personally. When we started doing some heavy research, when we decided we were going to go before our Richmond County Consolidated Commission to ask for SPLOST funding back in 2022, I needed to show them the importance of what the land bank did. And that's not just a number of properties that we sell to get back on the tax roll. That is not just the number of properties that we move forward with through the foreclosure process in order to be able to get taxes paid, because a large number of our clients are those who, when we started foreclosing on their home, paid their past due taxes. But it is also every neighbor of every one of those properties. As you note here, it's documented that there is approximately a 20% loss of revenue on a block that has a blighted property. So not only are you typically not collecting taxes on the blighted, abandoned, dilapidated home, often you're also expending money on that property because neighbors are calling because the grass is overgrown, because there are vermin and rats and snakes coming from the property, or some type of criminal activity. In addition to that, every house on that block is valued from assessment approximately 20% less than it could be. So I'm losing money on the structure, I'm spending money on the structure, and I'm losing money on neighboring properties that I could get in property taxes from that one house. Now, if you've got neighborhoods in Athens like we have in Augusta, we have blocks and blocks and blocks of vans. One's got a burnout, one's an overgrown lot, one is a house that's past due on mothballing, still just being boarded up. This one has a code enforcement issue. The one across the street has criminal activity. We've got neighborhoods that are now heavily impacted and losing money for the city because who wants to make the investment to live there with the blight? That's the twofold problem that governments have to look at when they're considering establishing a land bank. I, one, need to get the blighted property dealt with, but then secondly, I need to bring the community up in its standards. Next slide, please. We actually can go one more. I can just say this question as we go to the next slide. Essentially, how do we work? So a land bank, once you establish your intergovernment agreement, can receive properties in an array of different ways. Our intergovernment agreement here states that the Richmond County Commission, along with the mayor, can transfer properties out of the city's inventory directly to us. We also have the ability under the 2012 Land Bank Act, because it is an amendment to our intergovernment agreement. We can buy property from a real estate agent or broker. We can buy property directly from a property owner or investor. We can get properties off of the tax roll via transfer from our tax commissioner's office. We can go to a tax sale, non-judicial, and bid on property the way an investor would, or through the power of the tax commissioner can do what's called a judicial in rem foreclosure, where we actually move forward with a lawsuit against the property owner, asking that Superior Court award the property as opposed to payment. So we can get properties through an array of ways, which is fantastic for investors, because often investors need contiguous lots to have enough land to do a development, be it code enforcement, be it that your zoning ordinance through your planning, development, community development department, depending on what your municipality labels them. Some of your lots are going to be too small to build on, with side setback requirements, traditional zoning for the neighborhood. So a developer, investor, builder may have to get 3 or 4 lots before they can do one house. Well, if they can't get all 3 or 4 of those, they have no interest in any one of those. So how do you get the inventory out? You've got to have a land bank if you elect to put one in place. You've got to have a land bank that understands the private market issue, that you got to have enough land to be able to meet zoning, or you got to walk the builder through the zoning issue if they're going special exception or they need a variance. Well, you also got to understand the private market side, that you got to establish comps. You go into some of these communities, there may not have been new construction to take place for years. So the investor doesn't just want one house that they're going to build out of pocket with a construction loan. they're going to need to establish a market bottom so that they can cover their returns for their investors. So they need to build 2 or 3 or 4. And according to Georgia appraisal laws, it's best that that be 3. But in some instances, they need to do even more than that to show a turn in the neighborhood. Lastly, you've got to think through that last piece of what is the buyer, what is the renter. They don't want to go into a community where one new house is coming up at a time, especially one that has a reputation if they're local, or they've been told about if they're coming in as a transient, be it for college, upper education, new job. They want to go into communities that they know are growing. The land bank can help to move that message as well. Because we can accrue property, hold property, and put it into deals, be it through depository agreement with the inevitable investor or developer or homeowner, we're able to advertise how much land is being acquired in particular areas. It's necessary for transparency because we are still quasi-arm of government. So we have to list the properties and show that they're available, but they can be held for project interest. That lets community then be able to go to that land bank website or city website and the land bank's page under the city and see that certain neighborhoods are being invested in. It doesn't have to be the turning of dirt, but just knowing that the government is doing something to be able to put projects together is a good mark. Land banks also, because of the 2012 Land Bank Act, can directly negotiate. It doesn't mean that we don't have a procurement process, but we are in a position where if community interests better align going sole source, then we can sit across the table from a particular builder, particular broker, a particular investor, and we can bring about projects with that entity alone. Lastly, we can also, on behalf of the municipality, put pressure on that investor or developer so that the private ownership in the end, rental property, home ownership, low density or high density, can be community minded. What's all that mean? Everybody knows it's tough to build affordable housing right now because construction costs have not gone down and incomes have not gone up. We can prioritize, and at the Augusta Land Bank, we did when I wrote our policies and procedures, the need for affordable and workforce housing. To the extent, as we'll see in a couple of later slides of how we're operating here, that we want to make sure that there's a priority put on affordable housing, and we are not using the HUD definition of that. We will use a definition here called living wage, where we want to know that local folks can get into the unit. It is a very poor decision and bad branding if city-owned property or land bank acquired property only goes to market rate development. It makes a very clear statement to local residents, specifically native residents, that there's not an interest in maintaining their populations when all you're building is high-price housing for sale and high-price apartments for rent. Next slide, please. And we actually can go one more since that's just a title slide. Thank you. So again, when I took this position, coming out of housing and community development, we are an entitlement community. I was managing as the deputy director for entitlement grants, CDBG Community Development Block Grant, Home Investment Partnership Grant, ESG Emergency Solutions Grant, as well as HOPWA, Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS Grant. I also held the seat by title, not by name, for our COC Continuum of Care. So all of our grants coming from the Georgia Department of Community Affairs came through our office. We also had a competitive grant that we had received in CHIP funds from BCA as well as NSP Flex Pool funding, which we put into a permanent supportive housing program. And then lastly, remaining NSP funds, Neighborhood Stabilization Program funding that we used for scattered site home ownership. So we had a lot of grants coming through and everything dealt with income based on housing size, number of persons within it, and then total household income, number of persons working. When I took this seat, I knew that I needed to align the mission of the land bank with that of the Housing and Community Development Department. And so my then boss and I met at his home and wrote out our first year strategic goals for the land bank to align with what housing really needed. And that was land to still be made available for nonprofit CHODOs, community housing development organizations, to build affordable and workforce housing. But then my superiors, now being a 7-person board, also needed to see an amount of market rate housing coming into the community. At the time of me taking this job, we were selling houses for less than $135,000 in Augusta on average. Our finance department believed that we needed to be selling somewhere closer to 200,000 to cover all of the services that a household requires. That number now has exponentially increased based on service costs. And so we're doing as many projects here for market rate development as we are for affordable and workforce. Your land bank could potentially operate the exact same way, being that conduit between the need for affordable still being developed and the need for market coming into the community. So again, land banks can acquire property for you. We can clear those properties. Here locally, we have been given blight funding, in which case we've done a tremendous amount of demolitions in order to prep plan for new construction. We can hold properties again under depository agreements or direct development agreements, both for nonprofit and for-profit entities. So we're in a position in order to ensure that long-term projects still happen. And because we were the recipients of some Rescue Plan Act funding that Augusta Richmond County received, we actually are doing some direct investment in rehabilitation activities of structures as well. It's a good complement to the new construction that's happening around us because we're able to take care of some of those properties that don't require as much investment, and then they don't become a drain on the ability to sell new housing. Next slide, please. So I spoke briefly about that living wage concept, just because each community has the opportunity in order to see now that these living wage calculators have been created by the gentleman over at MIT to see what's the need in your community. We often say affordable. We're thinking HUD definition, 30% area median income. But often you have jobs in your community that households would not fall below that line. And so then it becomes difficult to put together a housing strategy using grants if the sheriffs, the teachers, the medical professionals, the manufacturers, the laborers in your community make $1 above those limits. As you put your land bank together, I would advise you give them the freedom to not be restricted to affordable housing only as defined by the HUD definition or by poverty rate definition, which is even more restrictive when you deal with your housing authorities. You want them to be thinking about future growth of industry and therefore future growth in housing and set limits that make sense for native residents, but also allow for future individuals to still be able to take advantage of opportunity. Next slide. So just a little bit about what we did here with that plan. Again, it began with SPLOST funding that we were eligible for and successfully got through the vote. That was $4 million for blight-related activities. I then went back before the commission with permission from my board to present for Rescue Plan Act funds, was able to secure $1 million for those. And so living wage housing became a complement to the two sides of the spectrum, or the bookends rather. Government-led development through housing departments, both authorities and community development agencies and their nonprofit partners, as well as for-profit investment coming from larger scale multifamily developers. We said, okay, what do? Play the middle. In one instance, we can put money into a lot that we've acquired. We can demolish the old structure. We can remove the overgrowth and trees. And as part of the demolition, we can go ahead and take care of the grading that's a pre-development line in construction when they're ready to pour slab. We can also work with local residents in order to be able to deal with housing. We've got a large number of properties that are tax delinquent in Richmond County where the owner does not live here. And in some instances, they have moved well away. We've got folks that live in New York that own properties and weren't even aware that their grandmother had passed and left something to them. So we can work with those owners on those structures to acquire those properties, remediate any fees or liens against them, and then use that house as equity investment in order to be able to get a project done. But then lastly, we've got a pipeline of buyers that come into our community because they want to live in Richmond County and they needed to have some type of supplements, but were above the HUD level limits for that down payment assistance. they'd take the class and then couldn't qualify for the funds. So we said if they were buying a living wage property or areas where land banks were developing, trying to remediate blight, we could support that buyer through funding received through these non-regulated sources so that higher income families could move into communities. So our three-pronged living wage program was we can bring money for development, we can bring a property back to life, or we can bring a buyer to a project. Next slide, please. So I noted earlier how land banks can hold property tax exempt long-term through agreements. I did a lot of work with a lot of attorneys and said, what's another need or way we can use that authority? And we came up with what was the tax abatement incentive program. It's difficult to get multifamily affordable housing development done if you're not going to use a LIHTC, low-income housing tax credit. Housing authorities become the primary partners in those. They often do their own procurement processes. It's often where an existing development already is. It's going to be demolished with temporary relocation and then return of some percent. And that's going to depend on if they qualify for a 4% or 9% deal, which dictates how much development money they have. So it's a cycling almost of low-income persons out and then return. But it doesn't typically make a dent in the amount of units that you need on the ground. So we said we'll incentivize for-profit market rate developers who want to build high-end, high-market multifamily units in our community. We'll acquire the land and hold it. We will make through agreement available the air rights and improvements to be maintained by them. And we will have a schedule. Our program allows for up to 10 years where you not only get an exemption of ad valorem taxes, which you're probably familiar with and things like your enterprise zones, but also school board taxes because land banks have the capacity to hold property tax exempt. And we have an agreement here with our local school board that as long as a project is not exempting more than $50,000 annually, we don't even have to go to the school board in order to have conversation, although we do keep them abreast. In exchange for that wave of taxes over term, we mandate that that investor developer build a certain number of affordable housing units. Our mandate here is 20%. But where I thought some communities were getting that wrong is they would mandate that the 20% of units be built in the project, a prorated share. And that's difficult in today's market because you can only take the amenities of the apartment down so much in order to be able to provide affordable housing. So we said, okay, you don't have to build it in the apartment complex. Go build 300 units, charge every tenant $1 million a month. But on this other piece of property that is land bank owned and controlled, you can give us our affordable housing units or workforce housing units. We essentially got a 2-for-1. Market rate on one site, and after 10 years, or if the agreement went that far, after 10 years, generating revenue for the city, and then another piece of blighted property being developed that would immediately generate revenue and also being built at an affordable level. Next slide, please. Going back to what was core for land banks, and that's dealing with blight and getting properties back on tax roll. We went after Rescue Plan Act funding in order to ensure that we can keep neighborhoods healthy. So as properties came in, this allowed for the land bank here to have the ability to go in and remove blighted structures. We sat with city legal and every city department, code enforcement, zoning, marshal's office, sheriff's office, and wrote a brand new blight ordinance that was approved by our Richmond County Commission, actually signed on site for a demolition project in order to remediate blight to allow for the construction of 11 new homes that were workforce level. And it put us in a position where now we can kind of lead the way in where development can happen. Because if an investor wants to go into an urban core neighborhood, not only are we corresponding with residents, keeping them abreast of the changes in their community, but we can be a tip of the spear and taking some of that blight out of the community before the investor even has to start to spend any money on their site. So we felt like this was a good way for Land Bank to be able to use its Rescue Plan Act funds to facilitate new investment. And last slide simply opens the door for questions. So I do thank y'all for letting me get through that presentation, and we'll answer any questions that you have, either in general or specific to what we're doing locally.
Go down the line, we have a question from Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Edwards, for sharing with us today. Got a couple of questions.
Yes, sir.
How do you compete with developers when you got a blighted piece of property? You try to get the property, but then developers will come in and try to get the property. So how do you sort of compete, if you have to compete, to try to get property? Because what's happening in some of our areas here in Clarke County is once a house is vacant or I don't know where wants the house, then it comes up for auction or a developer comes in and says, I'm gonna buy this property. They upgrade the property and they charge an arm and leg to either buy it or to charge rent. So how do you all, that's my first, how do y'all deal with that?
So I don't compete with private market at all. I want private investors to come in and redevelop directly. Again, the land bank's a quasi arm of government. So do we want to see gentrification of communities? Of course not. I do not want to see Native residents displaced, and I don't want to see them priced out. But if the government doesn't have to spend money to deal with tax delinquency, deterioration, and blight, you don't want to. Your competition should not be with the private market. It should be with time. There's going to be a number of properties that are either no bids at a tax sale or that are vacant with no structure to be redeveloped where construction costs don't make sense. And time will show you that those opportunities are where you need to make your investment. But just because a house comes up on the tax sale, it's not my job to get them all. In fact, in 2021, I went to a non-judicial tax sale held by the tax commissioner's office. We purchased 135 properties at that single sale. Every single one of them was the no bid. Let the market make its own investment so that taxpayer money can go where the market will not go.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think you answered my second question is about the funding of your department and how many employees you had. And I think you sort of answered that for us.
Yes,
How
sir.
your department is funded through, and I like the fact that you consider your department as a small business owner or business owner. I like that. And I hope,
Go ahead,
and
sir.
I
I'm
hope,
sorry. I didn't mean to interject.
yeah, I just say, yeah, I hope if we move forward with this, that we get the right person that will have that same type of mindset that, this is a business and this is what we can do to help housing. Because I'm like you, I don't like the word affordable. I like workforce housing. And I think that's what we need to really be talking about as we move forward. People who got jobs and plants, working as school teachers and now first responders, those are the type of folks that we need to really be trying to help find houses in our community. And I like the fact that I like the workforce move forward and affordable. So yeah.
Yes, sir. I mean, I can't say that I was fully briefed by my chairman of how much we would actually have to do to keep this organization going. I had one interview question because I already knew Chris, working with him as the deputy chief tax commissioner when I was still in housing and community development. But there are two structures to how a land bank can operate. You could fully fund operations, salary, rent, overhead, things of that nature, the way you would any city department, and then allow those revenues generated by the organization to benefit the bottom line of the general fund. So almost an offset. Or, as is in the case in Augusta, you could predetermine what is affordable for the budget to keep the entity in place and put the requirement on it to fill its gap. Now, I come out of private market before I ever worked in government, came out of banking, later finance. I've worked for 4 different municipalities in the state. This is the first role that I've ever been in where I had to put my private market hat back on to keep us in the black, but have to answer to politicians. And it is not an easy gap to fill, to know that we operate for the public good, but we got to make money. So just give that some thought and consideration of how do you best undergird your future land bank and its employees. Do you want to fully fund them to where you can have a little bit more say in that final outcome of product, workforce housing being a desire? Or do you leave them to their own devices in order to be able to meet bottom line, because the city ain't coming in and paying our phone bill if it get turned off. Like, we got to make money.
Okay,
So get the right person. Yeah.
thank you. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Lee?
Yeah, I'll look over here, I guess the camera's there. I have several questions, and I think that, you know, what you're dealing with in Augusta is completely different than what we're dealing with here in Athens. We don't have a problem with investment. We don't have vast tracts of blighted properties. We have some neighborhoods where you might have one every couple blocks or so. And often the taxes are being paid on them. You know, by the time they get to that condition, they're owned by a bevy of family members, and you know, they might be keeping the taxes paid, but nobody really is taking responsibility for the property other than maybe occasionally mowing the grass when they do get code enforcement called. We've got the student market, and the revenues that these student families have are, you know, far above what the average working Athenian has. So, you know, when there's a blighted property, as Dexter alluded to, it gets snatched up on the private market and jazzed up and rented out for $1,000 a bedroom to students. And that's pushing up the property values of surrounding residents who are getting priced out of their homes because their taxes go up. You know, I think that our goal here in establishing a land bank authority is to get to those properties before those investors get to them and assure that they are made available for working class families and even lower income families. You know, I think that we're less interested in inviting the private market into this because the private market is already like super activated. I'm interested in looking at commercial blight, maybe, and converting that to residential. And you did speak of non-regulated funding sources. You know, we are limited by the gratuities clause, so it sounds like you have some other funding sources where you're able to supplement some of these home buyers. Is that the case?
So to your first point, then, in considering a land bank, you may almost be looking along the line of like a land trust, wanting to ensure that land remains available from an affordability standpoint, but long-term hold. Your land bank can operate that way, but that's a more traditional product.
We
The
have a land
push.
trust too.
Okay, yeah. So
Yeah.
the push and pull of your trust versus your bank sounds like the ability to acquire and then the trust being used for the long-term hold. The bank can receive those tax delinquent transfers, but if there's not a large number of them and you just need a government arm operating in the private market to be able to get property, that limits what a land bank can do. But if it's what is best for your community, then that has to be the driver. You really then are looking for a real estate professional that is tied to city mission and vision. And the land bank can be established to operate that way in the residential market. And then once property is acquired by the bank, it then can be transferred over to the trust for future development, be that public-private partnership or directly. So in understanding that, I can say that a land bank still becomes a noteworthy tool, especially if heirs properties potentially become an issue. City of Savannah is working its land bank, Allison Goldie down there, to acquire properties and make a first right of refusal to heirs after clearing title, so that they're doing something unique to keep native residents tied to property. I would also potentially say there may be a noteworthy conversation with the county tax assessor of how they're looking at native properties, because if the investors are coming in and acquiring single family properties, getting them to a point where it's quality housing, meeting code compliance, but renting them by the room. That property is a business property, an investment property. And I understand in code, you typically can have so many persons that are unrelated living under the same roof. Here in Augusta, Richmond County, you can have up to 3 individuals unrelated in the same roof. So you're renting it by the room before it's deemed a boarding house. But our county tax assessor, sitting on my board, understands that that revenue generating property is not the same as the family living across the street, even though in assessment they are like kind in existing homes, not new construction. One was designed, renovated, made new based upon its investment opportunities. So on the market, it would be looked at from a revenue generating appraisal, not a comparable analysis appraisal. So they shouldn't be assessing value of Miss Minnie's house that she's been living in for 50 years versus this investor that's got 3 students in it. But that's an internal discussion government wise of how do you assess property to not tax people out. Additionally, you have the authority by vote to be able to establish some types of protections in how you look at areas where massive development may be. So if areas around the school have the greatest amount of properties being acquired by investors because of that private student housing population, then maybe there needs to be some type of protection placed on that area to not increase taxes at the same rate as you would other parts of the county. That's a discussion with your tax commissioner. So you've got some things from the standpoint of policy that would have to, of course, be voted on and be passed to become ordinance that can protect you. But then in addressing how a land bank can best operate and help you, it's that ability to get things off of the private market. They could actually buy stuff that's listed. And then those heirs properties that may be available so that you can maintain some level of affordability, and then shifting them to the land trust once acquired and cleared so that you can maintain some long-term workforce. To that point of the other funding, so SPLOST dollars, when voted on by residents, have a specific need. They're defined when the vote comes up. We did blight remediation as our topic when we submitted our application, but blight remediation under that VAD definition is an array of things. It is demolition, it is clearance, it is maintenance, it is tree removal. So we were very broad and not specific in that. So when I say unregulated, it is not that government does not have a fiscal responsibility. It is to say, though, however, that we were broad enough in definition that we're able to do some things for the private market investor in their pro forma using tax dollars that make sense on the project.
That's helpful, yeah. We need a conversation with our tax.
So Melissa, Commissioner Lane asked all the questions I was gonna ask. Do you have any? Just one quick question about college town, how many universities are there in Augusta? There's one.
How many Augusta University is the major school. We also have an HBCU here, Payne College, and then we also have Augusta Tech.
To Commissioner Davenport point, do you all compete with the university? And I know with Augusta University, which is your largest university, do you all have to compete though for student housing compared to residential housing? Has that been an issue for you guys?
It has not. We worked very closely with Dr. Keel when he was here in order to ensure that the expansion of the university, because it was new, Board of Regents came and did a consolidation of Augusta State and the Medical College of Georgia. We went through several name changes, but inevitably it became Augusta University. And as the schools, dentistry school, nursing school, the original medical school, and now cancer research facility saw growth, the neighboring historically Black neighborhoods of Laney Walker, Bethlehem, and Turpin Hill were at risk of gentrification. There was a desire by Dr. Keel to not come into that community and create space. Often universities, as they grow, can swallow things up around them. He wanted to honor culture and history of the native residents there. But private market is not as concerned about that. And so when we did a deal with Columbia Ventures based out of Atlanta, We acquired 4 acres of land just across the street from the nursing school. They built a market rate apartment development there of 221 units. Private investor came immediately across the street from that, built 5 homes, 4 bedrooms, 4 baths, all as master en suites. Told us that their plan was to sell those for about $375,000, which was considerably more than anything in that neighborhood. And then found out later they listed them and sold them for $499. So they completely changed everything about Laney Walker, but they showed there's a market for private student housing. We have since severed the relationship with the nonprofit that brought them to the table because that not only was deceptive to say the least, but almost criminal. Now there are properties that once were $70,000 and $80,000 in valuation in Laney Walker and Bethlehem that are seeing assessments of over 150 because since that first 5, they've done a second phase of 6 more homes, same design. So they're $500,000 houses there. You had to take the assessments up. But we're trying to contain it. So we work with the partners that want to do the right thing. And we're in a position, again, being a little different than your area, having so much blight that we can't acquire a lot. We have over 600 pieces of property in our land bank, holding about 250 of those for the city of Augusta, and then marketing the remaining 300 plus. We are actively acquiring and constantly moving properties in and out. We turn about 20 per meeting. We're in a strong spot as a landowner, and it allows us to have a lot of control. But my hope and ambition is over the course of 25, we want to cut that number in half because we do need to get those properties into homeowners' hands, and that allows for some of that stuff to go down as well. UGA is a huge asset for you. But at the same time, it is going to bring the private student market investor because there's never going to be enough housing on site. So there's just finding that balance. And because we're a deed state, you can't tell a private property owner what to do with their property as long as it's compliant with code. So if I build a brand new house and pay taxes and maintain it, you can't tell me I can't rent it out. But maybe there is a movement through a marketing campaign to help private owners know what they're doing to existing homeowners that are residents long term in that community. They're bringing a transient population that is beneficial to them, bottom line, and they're dealing with some vacancy, but they're not helping the communities where they're making these investments. And I'm sure that some of them, with the right messaging, might turn that a little bit in order to be able to help you out.
So, just a small few. Small few. Any other questions?
So it sounds like you've got a pretty close relationship with your tax commissioner.
Yes.
Can you describe, maybe simply, if such a thing exists, the various ways that property goes from being in their inventory to yours?
Yes, sir. So again, the tax commissioner has the capacity to transfer a property that is tax delinquent that's gone through the judicial and rem foreclosure process. They also can transfer things that are coming up for non-judicial sale. There have been instances where we'll see on the tax list for that sale for a particular month, a property that we want removed because we're going to pay our attorneys to take it through judicial and rem foreclosure as opposed to him having to pay his attorneys. It's one where we have constant communication. And if we see opportunity that we could take advantage of something in inventory to a greater extent than a single sale on his end, our tax commissioner is very clear. His job is to collect money. He can collect it from those that are bidding. He can collect it from the family that's paying the tab that's past due, or he can collect it from the land bank that wants to get it. He wants to get it back on the tax roll for future revenue generation. But first and foremost, you want to get past due taxes paid. We've got the ability to do that. And we also market very heavily what they have going through non-judicial sale as well. So not only does he have his website, but he has our office and staff constantly working to take new investors to the tax sale. We've gotten to a point now that every month for about 25 minutes before the sale starts, we actually give a class. He talks and teaches all those in attendance what a tax sale is, be it they're at a non-judicial or judicial in rem. And then we speak to the benefits of working with the land bank on those sales so that they may be able to add additional properties to their development. Then we walk those younger investors through our, I guess you can call it an overview, because the in-depth is sitting with me one-on-one at my desk, on how you actually get a project done, get it funded, get it up, because we want to create even more investors. So again, our communities are slightly different in that way. You are trying to get a handle on how many people are buying properties and driving prices. We're trying to get those investors that are looking to buy property. But I think what is similar in both instances, land banks only work well with good relationships with the tax assessor and the tax commissioner, because that's valuation and that's collection.
And one quick follow-up question. So when you're seeing the inventory that's coming for tax sale, it sounds like, let's say there's maybe one coming for sale that's right next to some inventory you already own. So it's
Yep.
strategically important. Is your tax commissioner, they're letting you basically complete that tax sale, pay those past due taxes and begin that process before it gets to the courthouse steps kind of deal, before it goes to an auction?
So land banks actually can do credit bid at auction if no one else bids against us, but we also have the ability to be able to pull a property off of a future sale. So if when that list is published, I see a adjacent parcel that is next to a land bank lot that I think makes the land bank property more valuable, we can request that it be pulled, and we can then contact our attorney to take it through a judicial and rem foreclosure, as opposed to it going to that non-judicial sale. That way you guarantee clear title. We then have the ability to extinguish any past due taxes. We can remove any liens that are against that property, demo liens, code enforcement liens, by vote of the board. And now I can take two pieces of property and potentially market them together for a better end product.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions?
I just have one follow-up.
Go ahead.
In addition to the follow-up question for Andrew, what's the past due for taxes, for property taxes, that for those tax sales? Are those taxes 3 years, 5 years old? Like, is there a average of properties that you're seeing that you all are going after?
Yes, ma'am. So tax commissioner has the ability to go after property at any point. Their software program randomly selects tax delinquent properties, and their levy officers work those lists to try to get taxes collected. Our intergovernment agreement as the Land Bank Authority restricts us from going after properties that are less than 2 years delinquent. Although we have had commissioners say that needs to come down to a year so that we can get control of even more property so that we can try to get it marketed. But we are at a 2-year requirement. We also do not get to count any property that has a payment arrangement on it. Our tax commissioner will work with families at their request in order to be able to get taxes paid in part. And so if a property is multi-year delinquent, but there's an arrangement in place, we will not go after that homeowner.
And you mentioned your arrangement with the school board.
Yes.
Basically, for any property, for $50,000 or less, basically, you can just move forward. And that's an arrangement that you have with the school board for those.
It
for
is.
their-
It is.
those taxes. Okay.
Yes, ma'am, but it's not valuation of the property at $50,000. It is a property that is generating $50,000 worth of tax revenue.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure I got clarification on the non-regulated funding sources. Well, what might those be?
So we have cash in coffer. Again, when we sell a piece of property, our agreement says that land bank can hold on to those assets. It is how we make the difference in our operational budget. So if we need to go and do something that is beneficial to government, beneficial to community, beneficial to nonprofit, we're not surviving strictly off grant dollars.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, Mr. Aaron, thank you for your time and wealth of knowledge. And I believe in our packet that was given out today, we do have your contact information. Do you mind if we have any further questions that we email you?
Not a problem at all. That slide deck also has my email address in, and then of course I've corresponded with several in the room today, so they have my email and office number, cell number, so not a problem. Feel free to reach out to me at any time.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank y'all, I appreciate it.
Yeah. So, next steps.
I have ideas. We need to look at our planning code, our planning and zoning code. Driving up.
Yeah.
You know, where the rubber meets the road is student housing and working families in neighborhoods that they're getting driven out of. And a whole bunch of that student housing is in violation of that single family housing ordinance. We need to, I mean, I call them in every other day practically. And they're building new houses specifically designed for student housing in single family neighborhoods and violating the accessory dwelling. I mean, their violation, I could name a half dozen off the top of my head. We have got to get that under control, and we have got to maintain affordability in our existing neighborhoods. He mentioned something about a boarding house license. Like, maybe we need to develop a boarding house license, and if you want to violate that single family housing ordinance, you have to apply for a license and get a special use permit, and we get to decide whether or not that property is suitable for that kind of inhabitation.
I agree with you on it.
We agree, but the mission is with the LBA. So moving forward, do we want to
Let me,
send this?
well, I mean, what we're gonna say, and I think we need to make a decision. Well, now we want to do a land bank first.
Mhm.
And then if we are gonna do a land bank, how we gonna fund it, how we gonna staff it. So I think we may need a little bit more work. So let me ask you this. When we say send it forward, what exactly do we want to send forward? Do we want them to send forward, say, us to move forward to look into doing a land bank? So what do we want to send forward to the commission
So,
and mayor?
I was interested in having us talk it out and send it forward to doing a land bank with the mission of affordable housing rental, preserving green space and future properties for HCC Gov, like pocket parks and fire stations and stuff. I think we have all the information that we need. And I personally see the benefit of having an LBA. Staffing, um, get advice from Melinda, when it comes to staffing. But definitely, some new insights with working with our tax assessor and tax commissioner. And one concern I did have is staffing in itself. And I mentioned that in a, question that I submitted or that I had asked at our last meeting is concerning, um, egregious people who are only self-interested when it comes to sale and the purchase of property. So we get an administrator, or director of the MBA, and they're only in the pockets of these developers. What's that part that we
That
have?
should not be the case if they got, first of all, we're gonna have
I
a
agree.
board.
Yeah, board.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important that he said the tax assessor and tax commissioner part of that board. So I think that's gonna be the key with the board, and I think we need to outline exactly about what our goals and what our mission is with this land bank.
I think it's a twofold. I think that's why you see commonly in most land banks that they are funded by the county, so that the county is able to determine not only who is in that position, but how that position is run. But you also do have security within the IGA when you develop that plan of what they can and cannot use the county funds for. Now, if they're gonna have some authority, autonomy to, when they make money off of a sale, to do with that. But if it's county money, then you get to control that. And to a degree, again, with that employment security from the county, and the board, you are gonna be able to steer how that land bank operates more clearly.
But I do like the fact that it could be almost run like a business though.
Absolutely.
You know, we won't be on the hook for their funding, so they have to be self-sustainable. So wherever we would put into that role, they need to understand that, hey, okay, we'll get you started. But as we move forward, you got to generate your income and things like that. Now, I say all that to say, they're gonna be a lot more independent than we will have a foothold in. So we have to figure out how much we wanna be, I know we're not, do we wanna get in the business of trying to buy houses, or do we wanna have an independent agency to do all that for us? Knowing, and we gotta be really tight with what we're trying to say with our mission, trying to accomplish with all this, and get in the autonomy to do what it needs to be done in order to have affordable housing. Oh, I'm gonna say workforce housing, in order for people to stay in those communities. Like, it could be a double-edged sword. So I think after the 10 of us, along with the mayor, we gotta need to make that decision. What do we wanna go? Do we wanna fund it from an HCC Gov perspective, or we want them to be able to generate and sustain on their own?
So, go ahead.
Well, so what I heard him say was they have a more business oriented mission, right? So they're really focused on polite and kind of working on the edges of where the Augusta private investment cannot find profitability or interest yet. And they clear those items and then that goes forward and there is revenue generated. So to your point, Commissioner, it's close to a business. But I also heard him say, well, if your interest is really in affordability, you're moving along that line more towards subsidy. So I had to know that their annual funding on that business model was $145,000, $140,000 a year. If you want to be more active on the affordability space, there may be a higher public subsidy that's needed to make that viable. We won't really know until you get into it. So one thing that HE staff and all of us can work to is we could come back to you all with a couple of different kind of tentative budgets, if you were, if we were going to start a land bank, here's kind of what you might be looking at. And then you all could decide and ultimately make a recommendation back to the body if you were so inclined for, hey, we'd like to see this prioritized to the FY26 budget. I think it's pretty universal among staff that if there's not a staff person that reports to the land bank, it's supposed to be done kind of like by a volunteer board. It's probably going to come back into the same state it's been. But that doesn't mean, even if you're selling things for affordability, that doesn't mean that there aren't program revenues that are generated.
Well, I was gonna say, if you think about, in that CDO that brought the single family affordable housing fund and the LIHTC gap financing fund into life, the LIHTC pulls from inclusionary zoning payment in lieu of money. And then we also have our pilot agreements with our housing authority. Those funds are generated annually and could be used to support staffing costs rather than it coming, if it's allocated specifically for that purpose, for a staffing purpose, then that's where that funding could come from rather than having to necessarily create a new position within the general fund.
We got the $4 million that we got.
Yeah.
Five million. That I would say maybe that does get a startup.
Yeah, you've got the startup.
Right.
You absolutely do. And then again, we do have pilot agreements in place where we know that we're generating a specific amount, or we're getting a certain amount of funding annually from those pilot agreement payments. And then anytime that we have an inclusionary zone and payment in lieu of goes into that as well. So you do have some other sources that can be considered to cover that cost rather than it coming out of that budget, the general funds budget.
So
It come out of the affordable housing special revenue fund.
does the mayor commission does the mayor and commission do the hiring for the department, or does HR? Who does all that?
Neither, that would be, once you developed your board would do it.
Board, okay.
And
So the board will get everything started.
And one of the things that's covered in this Q&A, and we can go into it as much or as little as you'd like. Legally, Athens has a land bank authority.
Yeah.
Right? It has the resolution. What it doesn't have is a board appointed by the mayor and commission to have any activity. So it's effectively dormant. The quickest path forward is a resolution asking the mayor or to go ahead and reappoint, right? And then that starts to create an entity on the other end, and it becomes a little bit more of a dialogue. You thinking about influence, because it is autonomous, right? And within its enabling documentation, they can do whatever the board asks them to do. However, if there is public investment, then each time that comes forward, if there's an IGA that directs it, that's a chance for the mayor and commission to hone the focus of this is where we want these public dollars to be invested. Similarly, attorney's office, the commission could do resolutions of, hey, land bank authority, or hey, airport authority, or whatever. We really would like you to do X, right? But beyond that, it's just kind of a formal communication. They don't have the ability to make them do X.
But the board is selected by the commission.
Right.
So I mean, you are putting people on that board that hopefully will support what it is you're wanting to achieve with that land bank authority.
So, repeatedly, he cited land trusts
Yeah.
as the means by which you create this affordable housing. The land bank authority might be the acquisition arm, but in the end, in order to create affordable housing, a trust is how, or a CHODO, another CHODO, I guess.
Well, no,
Is that
what you,
right?
if you remember in the beginning, I was calling it a housing trust fund. If you look at Savannah has what he's talking about. So they have their land bank authority, but then they also have their housing trust fund authority.
Okay.
And that is,
So that's a
that-
governmental entity too, not a separate nonprofit.
no, it's a nonprofit.
Okay, because we have a land trust.
We do, but they have their own mission, their own funding and their own agenda. This would
So
be a
this would be
nonprofit that specifically,
Second land trust.
well, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call it a land trust as much as I would just call it a housing trust fund agency, but if you look at the Savannah, they had a group that developed this agency.
Yeah.
So they get housing trust fund money, which in our case would not be the 1 million for acquisition, or acquisition strike fund. It would be the other 4 million. That's where that money would go. And they specifically would do the affordable housing activities that are defined, clearly defined within the approved CDO and agenda.
Okay, so he also mentioned, Savannah has an heirs property program or ordinance where they're able to acquire these heirs properties and direct them towards affordable housing.
Savannah has an interesting, what they do is the land bank purchases the property and then they do right to first refusal. So they go back to the home, the family.
Families. Okay.
After the
Yes.
taxes, everything's been cleared, because they buy it and they clear the taxes. Then they go back to that family and offer them first purchase
It's perfect.
That, yeah.
to
yeah,
maintain the integrity of the neighborhood.
That,
So they have that.
that would, I mean, how do we?
You have to do that.
So it seems like we need a resolution to revamp,
Reinstate.
reinstate the trust.
Land bank.
But it seems like we also need a mission, correct? Like a defined mission. I know the mayor and us have talked about workforce housing, rental, and just ACC government needs. Can we write that or put that? Is that something that everyone at this table agree with, or they want to add something, or can we put that in writing?
Can we kind of talk to the tax assessor and the tax commissioner first?
Yeah.
To see how they assess the properties? Because in my district, we have a lot of,
Yeah.
student
It
housing.
was really interesting how he said,
Yeah,
you can assess this property by one way and this property a different way, and then it doesn't impact that taxpayer as much. That was,
so I would like to.
that was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. But I think you have to change, to Melissa's point, we have to change some stuff on our books. I think in order for us to do that.
but as far as your land bank, so what you need to decide is you gotta figure out what kind of budget is gonna take to have the staff. And what he said is they started off with an executive director and a secretary.
Office
And he's just now finally adding a third
Yeah.
person, so,
since 2012.
yeah, since 2012. But also you do want to look at your work plan as far as there are land banks that are operating many different ways. Rome, Georgia is more focused on the affordable housing aspect, the neighborhood revitalization. A lot of your land banks are very specific to blight and purchase, and they have that housing trust fund agency that's working on the affordable housing component or the workforce housing component. There's so many different things a land bank can do, but what you have to decide is, what is the structure? Do you want five board members? Do you want more? It's 5 to 11, odd number. How many people do you want? Because how much impact do you think you're gonna have with how many members? And then so start from there and then work down into, then how do you want to develop what it is they do, how they carry it out, what their mission
So
is.
we have an LBA now, but it's just default or.
Yes, it's just,
There was
it's,
only like 5 people.
it was 5.
It has 5-member board.
Right.
So can we start there and get that reactivated, or do y'all want to add 7?
I feel like, we need people on that board who are, like, I feel like we need somebody maybe from the planning commission on that board and from the tax assessor's office. Like, I feel like we need certain people on the board that meet certain qualifications, rather than just like a random selection.
Yeah, no, you want people with property management, banking,
Yeah.
development. I mean, you really want people that understand housing.
Yeah,
So can we?
yeah, and we have that in other boards where you have to have a certain
Yes.
number of people and certain
And
qualifications.
I do like the Floyd County, how they set up their LBAs. There were mostly for housing.
Mhm.
So that means we need to update or redo our current LBA that's listed.
With the structure.
Structure.
And I would say maybe go with 7 board members.
I go even higher, like, I'm thinking 9 or 11 if you want to get people with all those different
Yeah,
complex.
especially when we bring in people.
Well, just start.
I mean,
Just
maybe,
start
maybe
if you 11 people around the table at one time and everybody got a mission. How exactly do we expect the land bank to move when we have 11 different people that's come to the table with 11 different ideas, when we're just now starting to get understanding of the land bank ourselves? I mean, because we're gonna have to lean heavily on staff to be able to help us understand what they're giving us to understand. I say 5 or 6 because we're starting over and it's been dormant. And let's be real, it's a lot of people in Athens who have interest in real estate, who can or cannot, or may not come to the table with good intentions as far as affordable housing. So if we make that number broad, how do we keep a hone in on who's really into this land bank for what the mission is for, instead of for personal gain? You know,
That's my main concern.
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think having ex officio members, people drawn from specific. Yeah, I think it's really nice to have somebody from the planning department on there, who knows.
Well, and that's where maybe your tax commissioner would play an ex officio role. And
Commissioner, yeah, like, having those
But just give them
specific
a-
qualified people in there, maybe as ex officio, and then the appointees.
But it would need to be 5 or 7.
5 or 7, and I would say 5 or 7.
Yeah, I go 7.
So can we agree on 7?
I can go with.
Yeah, we can all agree with
Okay.
Yeah, there's a procedural question.
Yeah, the current resolution that establishes 5. So you would either need to pass something, to expand it to 7, or start with that initial 5 and then do that later down the road. That's what you have the authority to do right this minute is 5, a 5-member board.
I am confident with a 5-member board.
It's fine.
I mean, did that board, from what I remember, I think it was at least 2 commissioners on there,
Yes.
a real estate agent. I can't remember who the other 2 people were. It might have been 3 commissioners, actually. I mean, it didn't feel like most of us on that board were all that qualified, like professional, talking about this stuff. So I just want to make sure we have a board that has people who are professionally qualified to advise the entire board, whether or not they have to vote on any kind of final decision.
Let me ask you, we don't have to have a commission on it.
You do not, they can be.
You legally can, but you.
I would put a commission on that as an ex official. I would not make them a voting, sort of like I'm on Peace Corps, ex official.
I mean, I think it would be important to pull in, request the commissioner to sit in on a meeting if they're discussing a property in their district. Because that might help them foresee any potential, political blowback.
Well, all land bank authority, meetings are public.
Yeah, but I mean, just specifically inviting them and.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I had to ask them, Courtney, I would say that commission, whoever that may be, make it ex official. Call it that, we need experts. Know about this, we gotta have somebody back, for sure. Somebody who got it back. And I had to my colleagues on Commissioner Taylor's point, we may have to go to real estate, but we have to make sure that their mission is the same mission that we have. They're not looking for the most.
I mean,
Well, and Mr. Edwards specifically said it sounds like the direction that we're headed, your executive director would probably be best to have an executive director with a real estate background. And again, if you're paying their salary, then they should be working for you.
I mean, it would be important to have it be somebody who understands the nuances of the market in this community because it has definite nuances.
Yeah,
Yes.
It's different, come with college town, so it's different.
I can't find that,
Which is for
the original LBA that HCC created years ago. I'm gonna find out the 5 board members, who they are, like,
If you look at the meeting minutes, it lists all of them.
okay.
I'll pull those up real quick.
But,
Sorry, I don't have those in my hand.
do those meetings, do those?
I know Commissioner Hamby was on it. That name sticks out.
I was, and Sharon Dickerson was on it. I mean, it might have been 3 of us and then
This,
realtor and.
the 2014 membership was Alice Kenman, Kathy Horde, Andy Harrod, Mike Hamby, and Mitch Schrager.
So let's change it, keep it updated to have business leader or something, or real estate.
You as the commission have the authority to decide whomever you want those 5 members to be. And then once they're in place, they then choose who the board of director, or who's the board director, who's the treasurer, who's the secretary. They would decide that. You decide who those initial 5 members are.
So my mom seeking advice is saying that it should be all 5 commissioners.
heck no, absolutely.
The law allows you, but
And then in previous conversations, like just a few minutes ago, it's gonna have to come back to the mayor and commission anyway, right?
So you all get to appoint the members, so you can appoint whoever you deem eligible. Right now, it is structured for 5 members. I was just looking at the 2009 resolution, which does allow you to dissolve it by resolution. So if we were gonna go back.
Just wholesale start over.
Start dissolve and start
And I
out.
will say, if you want, the statute does provide that if you want the tax collector, the tax commissioner, tax assessor to serve in an ex officio role, then that needs to be done by resolution, actually. So you would, if you wanted to do that, we would need a new resolution.
Only thing I worry about that, if they're ex officio, how much would they show up? I mean, I think it's critical to have somebody from those offices there, and they meet, and we're looking at this. So it doesn't bother me if we appointed one of those individuals as a committee member.
The tax commissioner is an elected
It is,
official.
Yeah.
Would have some motivation to show up.
So I think our current, when it comes to future tax assessors, they may have a different view. So that's what I don't know what.
so
we're
staff will create this. What we can do is talk to other existing land banks to get an idea and show you the difference, like how, if you have a land bank that has 6 people versus a land bank that has 2 or 1, a land bank that has full investment from the county versus one that like Augusta, where they get a certain amount and they have to generate the rest of their revenue. It gives you an idea of what you're looking at and the potential sources of where that funding would come from.
Mhm.
You've already decided you want to stick with 5, so you would need to start considering who and from what background you would want your 5 members.
I think it's crucial that somebody from planning departments or even if it's ex officio, somebody who understands the zoning on the ground and has some knowledge of infrastructure in the area.
Well, and you could do that. You could decide, we want 5 voting members and then we have this many ex officio, which would need to be, is it just the tax commissioner or is it all ex officio have to be a part of the resolution?
It only specifies that.
The tax, so you could decide how many ex officio members.
And I'll add to that, as far as, just to give you an example of how Chatham Savannah is made up, is 5 members.
Yeah.
They have the assistant county manager, the housing director, the building inspections director, a local real estate agent, and a local attorney. Augusta, where Sean is, they have a 7 board member. They have the county tax commissioner, the county tax assessor as the chief real estate person. They have a director of planning and development, the city administrator, and then they have 3 community members.
So,
So just to kind of give you an idea.
and those are spelled out though.
Yes.
Yeah, I
So
think we
that
need
would
to go
have to be with the resolution because of the tax, commissioner.
That would require, yeah, if you wanted the tax commissioner, you would need to do it as president. As a, no, not for an active, just ex officio, correct?
Tax, it says, well, actually, a tax commissioner, tax collector, or both may serve as an ex officio as a member of the land bank board, if so authorized by an IGA, local law, ordinance, or resolution.
What about if they were a voting member, part of the board?
Contemplate them being a board voting member, but I don't see a prohibition
Right.
against them being.
Against them, so you would have to do a resolution
Yeah.
for that, if you chose to
Yeah.
put them on the board.
And that would it be like a conflict of interest if they were to be like that model, like the tax assessor would be like the executive?
Well, I think the point is that the partnership is important to have with the LBA, because if you have those properties that they can pull off and then go through their own process using their own lawyers, then they're capturing property rather than it going to the sale of taxes.
Yeah.
So there's that benefit of having that conversation.
And I did reach out to the current tax commissioner to find out with the previous land bank authority, if they were doing that, and there really hasn't been
There was none.
activities. That would be new, something new.
So seeing like we got the wheel spinning, we don't want to send something up to the American so can move forward. This is the sooner we get this done, I believe, the sooner we can start seeing the fruit of our efforts and compete with some of our neighbors when it comes to these communities. And I'm telling you, these developers are not slowing down.
No, they're not.
They are not, and
They're not following the rules.
yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. There's some properties off of Morton Road that I need to have a conversation with, but, anyway, so,
Well, I think the important thing is, and Andrew, did you want to say something real quick?
yeah.
Well, I'm just moving towards our next meeting. So I think what we could do is take the existing resolution and see, present that in maybe a Word format. And if there's any changes that y'all would recommend to your peers, that would probably be a good format to do it. We'll bring you a couple of concepts on budgets after we review with other people. And then we will have some dialogue with the tax commissioner. I've already reached out to them about,
Could they come to that next meeting?
Sure, if y'all would like to have them here.
Could we have a list of what the makeup of other land bank authorities and those comparable communities? I think that would be a good guide for us.
Sure.
Because they seem to have, people from city government on there with specific quality.
Well, and I think that's to maintain the integrity of what they want to accomplish as a land bank.
Yeah.
As we look to the budgets, it sounds like there's some consensus in this room that instead of looking to a new obligation in FY '26, Rather, it would be kind of a reallocation of some of that existing $5 million investment.
Seed money, all of it is seed money, yeah.
Um,
And, for our next meeting will be on the 16th. That will be the week before the holidays. I'm quite sure a lot of families will be traveling. I was wondering, would the 9th, that Monday before, be, would that work for everyone?
There's,
Unless, if it's not,
College Square program that we had that after.
is it on the 12 o'clock?
One. There's two of them I had. And there's another one for the next week. Yeah, the 9th is good for me.
The 9th for staff?
Not for Marquita, but I can.
Okay.
at 12 o'clock.
Mhm.
The other thing we got is, this is on my calendar, is a College Square.
Separate one.
Yes.
That's the overall
Oh,
topic
okay.
input, and there's a second one on the
Yeah.
17th.
So
So it's kind of either or.
it's just on the calendar, so I just.
Yeah.
Actually, Marquita can be here online.
Okay, and, 'cause I already attended those. But I was probably me for the, and I talked to you about it, the, College Square.
I'm not just saying it's on the calendar.
Yeah, I think those two are the general public ones that
Yeah.
are focused on the stakeholders.
But, actually, I'm in November, so the 9th at 12, we'll meet. And we'll have a follow-up with, how other boards are made. And,
Potential budgets.
the budget as well as resolution to move forward. We won't be voting in January, our next voting will be in February.
Well, and keep in mind, you can vote to get it back up and running,
Yeah.
and it's still gonna take some time to get it
Yeah.
implemented. So all you're doing, if you decide to do that, you're just saying, yes, we're gonna commit to getting it up and running again, and then start working toward actual implementation.
All right, any other questions? Oh, go ahead.
I have one unrelated question.
Oh,
So you all in this room have been kind enough to do that survey on the BACs.
mhm.
Part of that was whether to retain a BAC, combine it, or sunset it. There's places, I'm looking at the answers from the four, there's a few places where there's universal, everybody wants, says PSCOB should stay as is, right? There's also probably an equal number where two of you might say one thing and then each one of you might go a different direction. Well, we will certainly share this as a summary as we come forward, but where there is divergence, as we prepare for that meeting, would you like staff to make a recommendation back to you?
Make a recommendation.
I mean, it also might be helpful to survey the entire commission. You know, I mean, we
Yeah.
represent like a
Just,
certain subset.
absolutely.
Or what we could do is you bring a recommendation and, well, I think there was some point that we can survey this.
Survey the charge.
Yeah.
So following this, y'all comfortable with us sending that same survey and context to the full commission?
Yeah,
So I kind of like it with us and then send it out, but it makes more
I mean,
sense.
it's interesting to compare.
Well, the other thing that we could do is we could show you where there's divergence, and then you could, if you want to narrow that survey and say, what are your thoughts on these six? Like, we know that we're not going to recommend to you that we're going to change PSCOB or HRC, as it might be.
I mean, that might change if you put it out to the whole commission,
Yeah.
honestly.
Well, so what,
Yeah, let's do that, yeah, what we just did from us and then send it to the commission.
full commission, okay, we will do that.
And I'm sorry, one other thing, we did have the GIC committee meeting prior to this meeting. And, one of the things that was brought up was if anything, consider a potential role for GIC committee in land bank.
And I think you brought a good one.
Yeah,
Going back to the solid waste and we're trying to do trash. So how do those, maybe they can talk to each other,
Yeah.
yeah.
maybe the GLIC committee needs to talk, talk about this land bank, how does all that stuff impact the committee? And what partnership can they form with one another? I think we don't do enough of is communicate with each other.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing that up. I think that's a great-
Absolutely.
I agree, because, you know, we do have concerns about the student housing and driving up costs for regular folks and driving those out. And I'm not sure that the GIT committee understands that impact.
Well, they're wanting to play a stronger role in advisory role
Yeah.
in that conversation. And so it was brought up as what role would mayor commission consider? So what we're gonna do is draft up, what our subcommittee is gonna draft up what they propose to mayor commission to consider GIC's role in all those different aspects. And then, because typically we only serve in an advisory capacity at the behest of mayor commission. So we're just gonna throw some proposals as this would be our role, so that it's actually more defined, clearly defined what the purpose of the GIC committee is from moving forward. So just, we'll have that to you soon, but just be considering what role they may possibly play, even in assisting you with the formation of this, of the LBA.
Well, I guess most of the, how many commissioners on the clique?
We now have, we just voted, we have 21 voting members.
Commission.
But how many?
Oh, commissioners, we have two.
So,
Two commissioners.
right.
They're appointed by mayor.
So I think it's, you know, to our point is, we got to have those conversations.
Yes.
Why the 21?
Oh, no, GIC committee voting members are now 21, but we have two commissioners as members
That's what we want.
out of that 21.
That's a lot of members now.
Well, think about it, as of right now, our role is very limited. The majority of the time, we simply vote to allocate the GIC point for LIHTC applications, and serve as an advisory capacity for the affordable housing investment strategy and stuff like that. So there's not a whole lot for those, but we wanted to expand it beyond just ACC Gov and commissioner and staff. We now have members from the faith-based community, the real estate community, the banking community, school board. So we expanded it to ensure that it's very well represented. Well, we just voted today, so they will be.
But I think, to our point, that maybe some GLIC committee members that may be part of those land trusts, possible. So we already got people that's in place.
Yeah.
That might be an easy vibe.
So something to consider.
I don't want to be rude. We do have Miss Lovely Jean online on the phone. Do you have any input concerning BHCs?
Hello?
Anything else from staff? Okay, we will see you guys on December 9th. There's a motion to adjourn.
So move.
All in favor, say aye. Enjoy your week.
Thank you.
Thank y'all.